Hi, everybody. I'm Colin Behring with Behring Co, and this is a quickly put together webinar here. We wanted to address current events and everything that's going on in the big news. Here with me, Nima Corpivara at KLD Attorneys. I'll introduce more about him in a moment, but today we are addressing the news of Silicon Valley Bank being taken over by the Fed, and as well as a cascading effect of what's taking place now. Signature Bank was taken over as well. Signature Bank, possibly more significant to the EB-5 community because they serve such an important role in the escrow, the banking, account setups, custodial accounts. They've done a lot more in the EB-5 industry than Silicon Valley Bank ever did. Silicon Valley Bank is also a different story than Signature, but we're going to get into that in a moment. So I'm going to pull up a quick deck, and we're just going to go through some key items, kind of talking about what happened, what it means, and then like what also it means going forward. We're going to leave plenty of time at the end of this for Q&A and for people to ask questions. We love the Demio platform here because you can actually just type your questions directly into the chat. We're going to see them. We'll be able to queue them up. And you can also raise your hand. You can come on stage and talk to everybody if you'd like to. But it is an interactive platform, and today is about getting questions answered and getting good information that's factual, things that are not salesy and or fear mongering and everything else that we see some people in the world try to take advantage of when there's actually no substance behind it. And then we'll talk about the risk and the items that do remain, and like what there are real concerns to have at this juncture, at this point in time, with current events playing out the way that they are. I will be focused on giving a lot of my responses from the economics and from the business side of banking and what's going to happen to potentially real estate and or the EB-5 market itself. Nima, I have invited to participate because of his expert knowledge and experience on the immigration world as one of the leading attorneys in the United States for EB-5 directly. So looking at the deck here, these are the things that we wanted to go over. The SVB takeover for sure, what the government has done, the market impacts, the things that we're seeing on the market, and things that are true, things that are false. But we definitely want to separate myth from fact. After that, we're going to go into the Q&A. Us here today, again, you have the benefits of having Nima Corpivara here joining me to provide all that insight on the EB-5, the immigration side, the expectations of a USCIS, and how it reacts to this banking scenario. And there's going to be questions about fund administration in your banks and all this stuff that we had set up. And what if that gets upended by a major event like this? There's things to talk to about this going forward. But Nima, you probably know your history a lot better, but because I'm just blowing through this at full speed, Nima and his team have done over 5,000 EB-5 investor petitions. I've had the pleasure and the honor of being able to watch a ton of it since about 2013. We've had 100% approval history through Nima and his partners since our inception, and worked with Nima on a number of different occasions. Featured speaker with IIUSA, EB-5 Investor Magazine, U Global Events, constantly on the panels providing expertise. American Immigration Lawyers Association, EB-5 committee, all blah, blah, blah. And Nima is complete, one of the most decorated attorneys in the country. So to read his resume, we'd have to unravel the whole scroll. So we're just going to move forward with it. But also, one of the best things to know about Nima is the advanced tactics. EB-5 is no longer simple, pushing petitions where you fill out a form and send it. You need to know what you're doing when it comes to mandamus actions, concurrent filings, partial capital contributions, unsecured lending, things that have passed through multiple litigations to get cleared up and to do right. KLD and Nima and his team have exemplified that they know what they're doing with all this stuff for years. So one of the top experts. So Silicon Valley Bank here, the story is unfolding and more information is coming out as we speak. And, ever since Friday was really the big day where everything got taken by the government. But this is really a story of interest rates and not playing by the rules that the market dictated. They fought the Fed. They had a ton of cash deposits that entered the bank from 2020, 2021 to 22. They almost tripled in size from that standpoint because the startup community, which had become like a very, very large proportion of their depositor base, had deposited tons of cash. All of those venture capital raises from the Anderson Horowitzes, from all of the Y Combinators, and all of these startups had thrown a ton of cash in the bank. And some of them turned into IPOs, and that IPO money ended up in the bank. But they grew so fast that they failed to be able to lend fast enough to turn that money around, put it into investments, to have it yielding cash that could then be used to manage cash reserves and all that kind of stuff going forward. So Silicon Valley Bank got left with a ton of money sitting around. And what they ended up doing is that because they couldn't lend it fast enough responsibly, they then just bought bonds. They bought treasuries, and they bought mortgage-backed securities. Problem is that they bought a lot of them with 10-year durations or more. That is a problem when interest rates go up. 2020, 2021, that whole COVID era, interest rates were at zero, they were at nothing, and it wasn't a concern then. But 2022, interest rates go skyrocketing up. All of a sudden, the entire game changes. Their entire portfolio of bonds and MBSs then cratered in value. Typically, that's not going to be a problem. What the bank is able to do is that if they actually plan on holding these bonds and these securities to maturity, they actually don't have to remark the entire book marking to market, which means they don't actually have to show the loss or respect it as far as their reserves. But the moment that you tap into those reserves, you then have to remark the whole portfolio down to market. And what happened is that as soon as the startup community and as soon as their deposits started to run low, they had no choice but to reach into those long-term securities, pull cash. And then that's when the notices came out where they needed to raise $1.8 billion to fill a hole. They then, at that point, had a conference call talking about why they needed to raise capital. And it ends up that corporate communication, which is now probably going to go down as a case study in PR for every single college student out there that ever studies public speaking or public relations, that call went really bad. And the entire startup community, and specifically a couple really well-known named Silicon Valley investors, were not convinced that Silicon Valley Bank was going to be a great idea. And when they say not a great idea, they didn't know if it would fail. They didn't know if it would be an issue, but they called all of their portfolio companies. They called all their investors and said, get out now, get your money out. So with this whole startup world connected by cell phone, by tweet, by LinkedIn, by message, by Telegram, by WhatsApp, everyone in Silicon Valley was pulling their money out, and they got $42 billion called out of that bank in less than 48 hours. Then the FDIC saw it, seized the bank. That was all she wrote. So it wasn't a crash that was caused by credit defaults. It wasn't that it was reckless lending or they were somewhere deep in the world of derivatives and really strange asset classes. This was a question where people were not convinced that they were going to make it, because of this whole cash call and everything else they needed. And then a rally ensued where it was a run on the bank, a modern day run on the bank charged by cell phone. And from there, what did the government do? The government reacted extraordinarily fast. This was good. To see this kind of cohesive effort where the Fed just walked right in, for about 5 seconds, they said that they weren't going to bail out Silicon Valley Bank. And then people were really nervous because those were depositors. That was people's payrolls. It was all this cash that was needed. But what the Fed really meant was they were not going to bail out Silicon Valley Bank's equity holders. They were absolutely going to fight and protect the depositors. The depositors are all of us that trust a bank to hold money and not do anything stupid with it. And the taxpayer and the depositors are, in fact, going to be made whole 100% with the power of the U.S. Treasury. Great news for depositors. As far as the equity, they're toast. They're going to get wiped out. But Why did the government move so fast? If you take a look at this graphic that we have on the screen, it's obviously the text is not very big, but I'll tell you the summary of what it is. This is not Silicon Valley Bank. This is our other big four banks. And this is their unrealized losses due to interest rates in mortgage-backed securities or bonds or treasuries. This is JP Morgan, Bank of America, Citibank, Wells Fargo. They have a lot of unrealized losses on their books, and a bank run is caused by people wanting money out of a bank, nothing else. And if they had let this spread, and if they had let this turn into a contagion where people are nervous, they're scared of what's around the corner, they're scared their money's not going to be accessible, that's how you get bank runs. The Fed over the weekend, they met, White House, everybody involved. This was not going to be something that could continue. They issued a full stop, 100% backing. Every depositor will be made whole. There is nothing to fear. However, they already started to see the contagion spread, and that actually started going to another bank and other small regional lenders and things. We'll talk about that in a second. But so the press release came out. The Fed said, we are backing this whole thing. The U.S. banking system remains resilient and on a solid foundation, period. And that's it. Nobody needs to question the banking system. And the problem is a lot of people that, run on a bank, they don't run on a bank because they personally believe the bank's going to fail. The problem is you think everybody else thinks the bank is going to fail, which that herd mentality gets vicious. And that's what actually causes the bank run. So then Signature was taken over the weekend. So was Signature the same thing that SVB was? Signature Bank, if you've seen it in the news recently, did have a couple of headlines that were not so favorable, but it was also because they were involved in the crypto space. Signature Bank, to be clear, was not a crypto player. They were not hosting cryptocurrencies and doing all this. They were a depository bank. They held cash for people that are in the crypto space and everything else, but they were not massively exposed to the crypto game itself. But because of the uniqueness and the kind of the derivative nature of the things that Signature Bank was taking on and things they were participating in, everyone kind of started to look around. It's like, okay, Silicon Valley Bank is a VC tech forward bank. They failed. Okay, Signature's in the crypto space. They're next. Time to go. Grab your money and leave. The run started again late Friday. Stocks are crashing. FDIC steps in and it's just full stop, 100% backing. This is done. They quashed it all in one business day. The banks are up and running today. Wires are being issued. We had a direct conversation with executives at Signature talking about their future. And the difference between an SVB and a Signature is that Signature was actually very financially healthy. They had over 2 to 3 times the reserves that the government actually requires them to have. The problem was that they were going to be a victim of a run on the bank that was out of their control. FDIC stepped in. Now, today, it's called the Signature Bridge Bank, and it is under the government's control, but the government did keep all of the executive team intact. They replaced the CEO, but as far as board members and executives that were running the business, they're all still there. They're actually expected to carry this business forward. Signature will eventually be taken under the wing of a larger bank and or acquired, but they are actually largely expected to continue. So Signature's services, their accounts, all their lending, the lines of credit, their CDs, the other products in which they serve people with, all of that is actually expected to continue. But again, they were a guilty by association, and it didn't matter whether they were good or bad. It was just time to run, and ultimately, that bank run is what shut them down. So again, this is a story that sounds familiar, though, and anybody that loves behavioral finance and talks or loves to talk shop about equities and things like that, one single phone call with a couple of different people turns into a massive viral spread, and all of a sudden everyone goes running for the hills and or buying and or selling, and then all of a sudden a massive market influence causes a consequence. It's actually the same phenomenon around meme stocks. That's what happened. You had a massive amount of pressure, whether it was buying or selling. For the banks, it was withdrawals. It was, I want cash. It was a run on the bank. With the meme stocks, it was a massive amount of buying on companies that really didn't deserve to be bought, but it didn't matter about the fundamentals. It didn't matter if the banks were healthy. If you were withdrawing cash and you wanted it all, the bank can't survive too high a volume of withdrawals all at once. That's because fractional banking, they only keep a handful of the reserves, 10% or so is on hand. The rest of it is invested. So any sort of volume pressure of withdrawals causes a calamity. The meme stocks, any sort of volume pressure of buying on a heavily shorted stock causes a short covering, and all of a sudden, whack, like 30x returns on a really, really bad stock. Same pressure, market forces, people cause these items. So the expected market impacts. The Fed message was simply the banking system will be protected at all costs. This is not something that should be a contagion. They have removed all doubt. The government acted way faster than they ever have in history in regarding this kind of stuff. And they quashed the idea that the US banking system was at risk. But the real story that precipitated all of this is interest rates. Violent increases in interest rates, where 8 times since June or May of 2022, we've seen interest rates fly upward faster than any time in my working history. And that can't be ignored. Like, this was a wake-up call that interest rates are real. The effects and the impacts of what interest rates are going to do to us are very, very real. So after this, what are people supposed to do? We need to take stock of where we sit with interest rates, how it affects the assets that we have, the assets that we're building. If you're in the EB-5 space, look at your project, look at your platform and the people you're working with. What is interest rates going to do to those assets? So as far as wanting to go from here, Nima, in the EB-5 space, like, first of all, just tell us what you've experienced, just over the weekend and the phone calls you're getting. What does it feel like from the EB-5 attorney side when SVB and all this stuff has hit?
Yeah, so anybody that's here watching our webinar now, this is probably the quietest I've ever been for the first 17 and a half minutes. I think, EB-5 it's such a unique process because not only is it a very large investment, but it is immigration into the United States, green card for the principal and their children, the ability to go to university in the US, the ability to not have to go through H1, sponsorship and potential backlog. So we have a high investment threshold, which tends to cause anxiety in people. And then we have a very intimate and personal relationship of the green card, for you and your family, which is also high anxiety. And then, of course, anybody that's dealt with USCIS knows that they are a black box, right? Getting information, correct information out of USCIS is near impossible. So, really our role as attorneys is to be able to provide this information through some of the committees we sit on. And then, of course, the number of filings, we just have more information to share than another attorney that could be excellent, but doesn't practice in EB-5. So, when SVB goes down, as is in all industries, you have some players in the industry that are happy to discuss, the pros and cons of their project. And then you have competitors that don't only want to discuss their pros. Success is not enough for them unless someone else fails. So you get marketing emails that are sent out that prey on the anxieties of the investors and try to correlate things that are not correlated. Signature Bank is genuinely one to be worried about from an investor perspective. Many regional centers, maybe many NC issuers, they have accounts at Signature Bank. It's probably the most popular bank in the EB-5 space. And thank God the FDIC has stepped in and is insuring those deposits and allowing, normal process of the bank to continue. SVB Bank doesn't have anything to do with EB-5. It's not the largest bank in the Bay Area. That's Wells Fargo. It's not a significant employer in the Bay Area. Certainly, it does a significant amount of funding for startups, but that's not only in the Bay Area, it's across the United States. I think from me and the investors that are nervous about, specifically what will happen to, the Behring project of 1900 Broadway, a for rent apartment construction that's going to be finished in what, a year? Is that a fair timeline?
Less than a year.
So, a year and then maybe 2 years to 2, 3 years to stabilization. I don't know what the correlation is to SVP bank. I think what people outside of California don't realize is that the reason San Francisco always has new and growing businesses, for the same reason Southern California does, is the UC education system. The UC education system produces more engineers, more doctors, more STEM graduates than any education system in any other state. When Elon Musk has these press conferences of California is too restrictive and the taxes are too high and I'm moving my offices, he does not move the engineering. He does not move the manufacturing. And that is because you cannot find another state to replicate the STEM degrees, the graduation of the STEM degrees, the high earning positions, and the innovation that takes place in California. That's the story of California. And, a small bank that's not related to EB-5 is not a lender on any EB-5 projects. I have no idea what it has to do with.
Well, even on top of that, like what we've now learned, through all the news articles and things like that, is that SVB was kind of a terrible lender to begin with, meaning they didn't actually make loans. They sat with a bunch of cash on their balance sheet from all of the startups and all these people, and they invested in other loans that were already originated. They bought notes, they bought treasuries, and they did all that. They weren't even a massive lender. It almost 190 to 200 billion dollars of assets on their balance sheet. They had like 3 billion in actual loans, that they had actually originated and made and did banking for. They had certain venture loans and things that they had done, but as far as like real estate and being part of the real economy, where they were sponsoring jobs at hotels and office buildings and or construction, things that really percolate into the big economy, they were kind of a small participant. And really they had a hard niche for banking because of the fluctuations of cash that are the nature of the venture capital world, where you raise a ton of money, you spend it all, you get to your next round, and if you did a good job with the first one, you raise a lot more money, and if you didn't, right, you're broke. And then you're out. So SVB, was kind of a victim of the community that they actually serve. So it's got a little bit of irony to it all, and probably an entirely separate video. But as far as EB-5 and just looking at the immigration world and projects, with how big of an issue, or how much do you think that investors realize how important interest rates actually are to their investment?
I mean, I think they probably don't. I would say, most immigration attorneys, don't necessarily understand the financial, background that's involved in doing project due diligence. Not saying that I'm capable of always either. We have people that we lean on. And I think maybe that's not done as often as required, especially, the early days of EB-5, the structures were not as advanced and mature as they are now. As EB-5 has evolved, we start seeing institutional players, and you start seeing, difficult to understand project structures, right? And I think that's actually a good thing for the market when you start seeing fund models and diversity of risk, and fully integrated developers that can offer multi-classes of asset investment. These are all progress for the EB-5 industry. It starts taking projects to a place that they can stand side by other investment opportunities in the market, and it's good for growth. But I think as investors, and there's an old story that the worst investors are doctors and attorneys. We don't always understand these complicated aspects, and some regional centers, some projects, they may not want to dive into the secrets of their projects. I think as I see more offerings coming out from projects, they really try to hide the ball, within the scope of their documents. And if something were to go wrong, they will hide behind their documents rather than what they may have explained to you when you were signing up.
And in this world with EB-5 and like, as far as USCIS, like obviously since the RIA, we were expecting better behavior. We were expecting for some of the non-hackers to hopefully wash out and disappear. Some may or may not have tried to stick around. But ultimately, when push comes to shove and like this stuff kind of plays out, like we're in the, call it the early innings of the RIA, right? We're here operating for about 6 months, but yet you're not seeing approvals yet. You're not seeing USCIS responses to a 956F. Like we're not there yet. We're in the early innings where people can kind of hide in the gray area or call it the cloudy or the fog until USCIS starts acting. As far as USCIS kind of now taking the position of acting like the SEC and wanting to govern this stuff, are they going to, what is your take on a group kind of just standing behind the half truths and relying on their disclosures when they're completely fear mongering or taking advantage of things like the SVB and trying to pitch items that may or may not even be real? How far do you think USCIS, how much leash do they give these people before they actually just start clamping down and terminating?
Yeah, I think, one of the interesting things as a result of the 956 filings and the RFEs that have been coming out is how much USCIS is paying attention to public information,
Yeah.
whether it be your website, your blog posts, the emails that you send out. They're really analyzing this from, as you said, an SEC perspective as what is your issuer responsibility as a fiduciary in sharing information.
Mm-hmm.
I think, it's not my place to tell people how to operate their business, and for the most part, I stay out of it. But one of the things is investors often get taken advantage of this in EB-5 by disinformation, which is out there, combined with long USCIS processing times. And I think a lot of the time an investor will defer to the idea that, well, if this is a successful regional center with multiple projects, they know what they're doing. If this is a successful attorney, they know what they are doing. Why would they jeopardize their career or their ability to secure future investment through disinformation or lies? But I don't think that's the case. And I think, maybe disinformation or lies may be too extreme a word. Maybe sometimes it's just ignorance as to the ramifications of what we write down in words and we can't take back. But I think, it's really, really important. All projects are not the same. Projects play games, and some of that is intentional and some of that is not intentional. There are all regional centers and projects out there that want to redeploy your funds. They are going to take advantage and they're going to play games between the term length of an EB-5 loan and then when you actually receive your exit. A common one is an EB-5 loan will be 5 years with maybe 2 one-year extensions, but an investor's redemption period will have 3-year extensions. So you lock yourself as an investor into 7, 10, or 13 years through no fault of your own. There's all these little subtle lines that you can stick in. And then I think the other thing too is just viability of a project, right? So many projects say, well, our exit strategy is refinancing. Okay, but what's current refinancing loan to value, especially at these high interest rates? For hotels, it's 45 to 55%. So if you're presenting an EB-5 project that's already 75, 85% loan to value, when are you doubling in value to get refinanced by a bank, right?
Yeah.
So if the idea is to sell, what is your per key price to sell? And under what time frame? I've seen financial models where they tell investors they're going to sell the hotel in 5 years, but the financial modeling doesn't show profitability until year 11, year 12, year 13. So I think these are all factors to take into an account that are probably not readily clear to an investor that's not, aware of the way that EB-5 and these projects work.
Yeah, we have a hard time with it too. We've just traditionally we've been a residential master plan community builder for generations, all the way since my grandfather. So from the 50s on up. And then only, from the third generation, we started looking at urban infill, multifamily and rental apartments, that kind of stuff. But we know that the master plan communities are kind of like one of the big rural topics because, they take a lot of space. You need super cheap land and you need a community that's willing to entitle pretty much anything because they'll do anything for permits and fees. So a lot of our communities in those development phases were always kind of on the outskirts. They were out there. They were half an hour outside of urban centers, an hour outside of urban centers. And that's the only place that you could get large swaths of land to do this kind of stuff. But the problem that I see with those communities is that we always knew they would take 12, 15, 20 years to build. And that's because it takes a ton of capital and you can't roll those things out all in one phase. It takes thousands of acres of land. It's 1,000 units, 1,200 units, 2,000 homes. It takes a huge amount of time to chew through those projects. And, if you look at the velocity of how quickly you can build them and how big those phases are, and home building is also an all or nothing game. You either sell a home or you bust. You don't have time to sit and wait. You can't hold inventory because you're cranking on senior loans and all this kind of stuff. And then when I see, again, what you're talking about, where there's a 4 to 5 year exit or a 4 to 5 year loan on a 15-year deal, it just doesn't add up. And, how people can kind of look at these kind of things and how the average EB-5 investor is supposed to know off the top of their head. It's a challenging environment out there. So the biggest risk today really isn't, call it, real estate or the economics or the immigration approval itself. It's really the misinformation. And there really isn't a feasibility police that goes in and says, no, this is crap. This is complete garbage. No way. And I find that to be difficult. But from the policy side in EB-5, what are the other things that you kind of see out there that just kind of make you shake your head when you see it in marketing, or that might be deceiving, that kind of stuff? Maybe you can comment on priority and what rural's doing with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. If you look at the RIA, we have these new visa categories of TEA, rural, and infrastructure. I mean, it does say in black and white lettering, right, that rural projects will receive priority. I think, one of the problems, and with your colleague Greg, former IPO officer, that's been so enlightening is, okay, well, one, how many actually people are working at IPO, right? That's been the process with some of the delayed processing times, and USCIS is going through a big hiring spree right now to get those processing times down to what investors would expect going into the program, 18 months, and then 1 year, and then 6 months. So that's phase one. And then phase two is priority processing doesn't have a definition, right? So USCIS has not issued rulemaking. We have, this first USCIS public engagement on March 20th. You sit on the quarterly meetings with USCIS where you have discussions about issues. We have no definition of what priority processing is, right? So if you take the letter of the law that you somehow will be processed faster than other applicants, then rural is incredible, right? Because you'll get a visa number faster than they will, but we don't know. This is not a game of when you file your application if you're outside the United States. It's a game of when do you get to the consulate to get your visa number. And I've said this. I think one of the worries about rural, and this is not a financing component of it because I'm not qualified to give a discussion on that. One of the issues is we know that there are certain countries that will only file with rural investment. So we know China, because of the long delays, most investors in China want to file rural. And USCIS and the State Department are very slow to give us data on the actual number of filings. So I think we kind of have this thing where the largest taker of visas has started filing heavily within rural applications since September. We don't know how many applications there now are available. So somebody that's maybe entering a rural project now, they may actually end up waiting longer than someone that's in a TEA, or vice versa, right? Because just the data is not being published by USCIS. So of course, regional centers are going to market priority processing, get in line, and by the time USCIS is ready to process your case, maybe you'll get priority processing. But then there are regional centers that will openly tell you, this is a rural project. We don't know what priority processing means. And they're being honest with you. And that is excellent, right? And that is exactly how you should run your business.
Yeah. So actually, let's touch on that more because I think this is something that's too easy to overlook. Where potentially, as far as investors go, and investor history, probably one of the most devastating times in EB-5 investment history was post, third quarter, which was fiscal fourth quarter of 2015. It was the first big expiration, in the first big like retrogression, like everything happening all at the same time. And you got 15,000 Chinese I-526 filings. It all happened at once. And there's no, like, even with 15,000 filings, like in the same quarter or whatever it was, that the massive flood, they still weren't really able to issue like official retrogression. And then people were like, okay, well, it might be a year or 2 years or something of that nature. And then lo and behold, 2017 or 2018 shows up and it's a 10-year backlog. And
Right.
it's because like we had this massive delay in the way that the visa bulletin actually records the retrogression, puts the dates back there. And it's after
Sure.
leaving 2 years of time to trap people that didn't know what they were doing. So, like then we see marketing where it's completely talking about rural. Rural is faster. Rural has priority. It has all this stuff, but it might lead you like straight priority to a 10-year wait if you don't know the stats. And we're not there yet. And I don't think we're anywhere close
Yeah.
to retrogression. What are you seeing, in that world? Like where are people spending time on their projects? Is it rural? Is it urban? Is it infrastructure? Is what countries, like where's the action if you had to handicap what's going on?
Yeah, I think, I mean, China is very set on rural, right? I mean, it is the 2000 set-asides. They don't want to experience the backlogs that they had in the past. And I think, if you go with what USCIS intention is, if they're looking at rural, I think they're looking at, maybe manufacturing, right? Projects that are in the benefit of the United States. There are some of those rural projects in the market, and I think that is the intention, right? If we're going to do mining, or we're going to do solar panels, or we're going to do batteries in rural communities, we're going to do oil processing in rural communities, that is a rural project that EB-5 should be used for. That is
Mhm.
creating thousands upon thousands upon thousands of jobs in a rural community and lifting the entire economy of that city, right? You have now gone from impoverished to potentially a middle class city based on one of these large scale rural projects. I don't believe, in all honesty, that they were thinking of 5 and 6 star hotels that can't get traditional hotel financing, because hotel financing for seasonal resorts is very difficult. And if without EB-5, maybe they don't have that capital injection that they need to move forward and build. Um, but as an investor, especially someone outside of the United States, being able to decipher one rural project to the other when the marketing is the same and everyone is promoting priority processing, I think that's what the difficulty is. But I think if you're a concurrent filer in the United States, you have your 485 filed the same day as your EB-5. Your children's ages are locked out. You're going to receive an EAD and an advance parole, which is the travel document, regardless of any future backlog, and you will continue to extend those documents. Then which reserved category you file in is immaterial. I think you have to imagine that TEA and rural will move at somewhat parallel dates if there is a backlog. So I think what matters is filing before a backlog, and then if there is a delay, writing it out, knowing that you have an EAD, knowing that your children's ages are locked in. I think if you're outside the United States, this is a more difficult assessment, because you are thinking about the 2000 visas, and then you're thinking about the rollover of visas. So if you are China and you've experienced a backlog, if you're an Indian national in India and you've experienced a backlog, I don't fault you for going towards rural, because then it is a race to the consulate to pick up a visa, priority processing, the ability of the project maybe to secure an expedite, plus the visa, the excess visa categories. It makes sense. The one really disappointing part and about the visa bulletin is, one, USCIS doesn't communicate with NBC, so we
Yeah.
can't really get accurate, 1, 2 year ahead projections from the State Department. So that's just really disappointing.
But
and
isn't that
makes it.
also because there is a gap in, there's 1,000 filings. It doesn't necessarily mean there's 1,000 visas that are going to be issued. And the problem is the State Department and NBC, like they want to actually look at the number of visas that are going out, which means dependents, approved versus denied, all these
Sure.
other things that could move the number away from like I-526 filings turns into a voodoo number that you have to kind of extrapolate statistically on what the most likely size of household is based on what country,
Sure.
which even that number is now a moving target. We've seen things change significantly out of China, where it used to be like that was a household of 3. That's all you got. And now like that number's kind of moved quite a bit. So the State Department, kind of using 2 accounting systems where you have filings are one number, but actual issued visas are another, that it's just ripe for manipulation where because nobody can be wrong, everything they say is potentially right, no matter
Absolutely. Yeah.
how manipulative or, how, kind of, just really, just derogatory and or, manipulative or predatory essentially is the word I was looking for.
Some of it honest mistakes, some of it intentional.
Right. Yeah. In the fog of
And
war, it's hard.
the difficulty too is you see the RIA where, okay, USCIS says, where Congress tells USCIS 526 approval, 6 months or less, right? So now you have these you have these new created visa categories, rural TA and infrastructure, those visas being available from October 1 of 2022. Okay, well, when this fiscal year closes, September 30th, none of those visas will be used and they will be wasted. Why? Because it doesn't take USCIS 6 months to approve a case. I think your best case scenario is 18 months, more likely somewhere between 20 and 24 months for approval. So that means we are 2 years away from any of the RIA cases being approved and any of the visas being taken. So
Yeah.
you have this, we don't know when applications are going to be approved. The data is not readily published or readily accessible necessarily. Suzanne Lozicki does a really good job of pulling all the data and putting it into a digestible format. So some of us are left guessing. Some of us make educated guesses, and then some of us use that to our advantage to push projects without worrying about what the possible delays are for investors. And again, deciphering that as an investor is really difficult. So this comes back to, your attorney is your education source. So feel very comfortable that your attorney is going to give you the right answer. And then what is your relationship with the issuer of your NCE? Do you have a good relationship? Can you go back to them? Do they have the right answers?
Yeah. Okay. So, Nima, just now that we have the group here and everyone's starting to get friendly and starting to ask questions and things like that, I want to ask you one from the top here. I tried to address the idea of publishing data. So, like, when is USCIS really going to share this stuff? Just quick thought on what people should be looking for from USCIS that will be telling it all.
Sure. So telling it all is, that's hard to answer. So we typically get quarterly data about 2 months after the end of the quarter. It's going to give you the number of filings, and then it'll give you a breakdown by country. Similarly, NVC does the same. That shows you, how many countries, how many individuals from each country are pending to get the visa. The difficulty comes in the way that NVC administers this. How many So, as you know, in the rules is 10,000 EB-5 visas, and then those are divided by, non-TEA, non-rural, non-infrastructure, and then 7% per country. But sometimes a country will get 11%. Sometimes a country will get 4%. And that is the math that they don't share with us, which makes it very difficult for us to project. I think, again, the huge benefit is the concurrent filing. So if you're in the US in a dual intent visa, if you're entering the United States in a non-immigrant visa and you 90 days from now you tend to change your mind about what your reason for entry was, you get that 485 filed right away, you get the EAD, you get the advanced parole, you've removed yourself from this priority date game.
I do want to talk about all of that because I think it's really important to actually isolate what you can control versus what you can't. And that's going to be a story of the concurrent filing. But a couple questions just to honor the people that actually showed up. and wanting to go through that, because like the concurrent filing thing is a big topic for closing out today. The situation for countries other than the big three, whether it's China, India, or Vietnam, are you seeing activity, and where's it coming from? And will that play a big part in being a spoiler for the big three later on taking their numbers?
Yeah, it's possible. I think, so certainly for those countries outside of China, Vietnam, and India, there's no backlog. There's never been a backlog. There's never even been close to a backlog. I think outside of the big three, Korea tends to be the largest taker of visas, and that number is actually declining. So I don't think we're in any immediate jeopardy of some country that has not historically participated in EB-5 jumping in a higher volume. I think for any countries where you start picking up a number of investors, this is very possible in the coming months in Latin America, based on what's happening there politically. It's not only a devaluation of the currency, but there's also some presidential things that are going on.
Okay, so we said Latin
Removing of the
America,
president.
but the visa bulletin, and everything else wants countries. Where
It's per country.
I know where's
So
the
I think
volume?
So, the volume in Latin America is Brazil, but I think you'll see a rise in other countries, Chile, Peru, Argentina. But that typically involves some other countries that drop off in filing numbers, right? So, Korea is less, South Africa has become less. So I think there's kind of a balance between the up and coming countries and the decreasing countries, that allow for, more visas for China, India, and Vietnam.
Gotcha. Yeah. And then, outside of those, like, are you seeing any other activity like from the unspoken countries where, what about the African continent as well as Europe? Is there any upticks there compared to what you're used to seeing pre-RIA?
So there's always this idea that Africa is gonna, Africa has a very young, educated population, and there's a growing middle class in many of the African countries. So certainly, we've spent time there. Some of our partners have spent time there to see what the interest is in EB-5. It doesn't really happen too often that you see, investors from Africa, and that's source of funds. Source of funds is an issue. It's not the same documentation level as Western countries on Western banking. USCIS and the consulates in Africa have always had a high suspicion of fraud. So there's typically administrative processing on those cases, which results in a lot of the Africans saying, well, I don't need to go to US, I can go to Europe. The number of filings out of Europe is, it's not a large taker of EB-5 visas. A lot of people that live in Europe, they enjoy living in Europe. They want to continue living in Europe. So it's not a large taker. And that's a true statement for Mexico. A lot of the people that are successful in Mexico absolutely love Mexico, and they want to stay there. If they do want to get the green card, it's maybe even short-term in nature, to go to education, go to school, start a business, and then give it up. So these are the other state of plays that haven't changed too much. That's why we see continued demand from the same countries.
Question here, talking about, is there any way to see past EB-5 investments and how they've progressed for certain projects? And it's a question on the legal side. Actually, two-part question. Let's start with that one. Is there any way to dig up the history of how people are performing?
So unless this information is published by the regional center or by the project, no, right? These are private offerings. There's no requirement that they have annual reports that are available to the public. It's all internal documentation. Certainly you can see how many 829s have been approved and how many denied, but that doesn't give you any idea of if the project was financially successful or if the project has been paid back. But this is very true of any business, right? You're not able to walk into your local convenience store and ask them to see the books. What was the second part of the question? Was it about?
Totally separate. Asking about, when does the sustainment period begin? And I think we had some news come out about that recently.
Yeah, so I think maybe inadvertently they came on the hottest topic in EB-5. We don't know. So typically before the RIA, the sustainment period is your 2-year conditional green card period, right? We always talk about two important things, which is your job creation window, and then your sustainment period, which is the 2-year conditional term. When I first started in EB-5, an investor had to say sustained until the 829 was approved. And then later they updated the rules that you had to be sustained until the 829 was filed. And now as a result of the RIA, and hopefully we get this answer from USCIS on March 20th, is what is an actual sustainment period? Is it 2 years after 526 approval? Is it 2 years after you've made your full investment? We are waiting for what that interpretation is. As of now, we operate under the idea of it's when you file the 829.
Yeah. So I have unverified information that I haven't actually read in any kind of code or statute anywhere else, but I believe it came out of the registrar that the interpretation right now from Securities Council, talking to Charles at Lexicurity, the interpretation is that it's actually for the RIA policy going forward is that the investment is from the 2 years from when the investment is made would be the sustainment period, which means that would be I don't want to say material change because it's actually a definition within EB-5, but it would be a monumental shift in the way that EB-5 is offered, it's used, and I guess really the requirement from the immigration aspect of when or how long money needs to be held on to, and what that would do to certain offerings and certain operators that were kind of relying on the world of redeployment and things like that. But if that's the case, how do you see any real shifts on call it the immigration side for the investors? What is your prediction of how that affects things going forward?
Yeah, I think that would be great, right? First of all, because this program outside of processing time is 2 years and 2 days, right? The day you file your 526, the 2-year conditional period, and the day you receive you file your 829. So this should be a 2-year and 2-day program. So if we get to a sustainment period that matches those 2 years, I would be incredibly happy. I think this will be difficult for USCIS because they don't process cases within 2 years right now, right? I think our best case scenario is 18 months. Many people that have filed EB-5 previously, they've been seeing 2.5 years for approval. So does that mean you can get your money back before your application is approved? These are the details that we need to go into. So I think from an immigration practitioner, it doesn't really change too much in my life. Certainly it makes the quality of life for investors better because 800,000 is a large number. But I think from a project side, of course, there are regional centers that want to rely on redeployment. They want to use lower cost of capital to get their next 2-3 projects going. But I think you're going to see some sort of standardization in the industry of 5-year investment terms. Because really construction in the United States, financing in the United States, it's so different than every other country. And I think 5 years is a good expectation for most projects to be able to complete construction, stabilize, and refinance or sale. So I think you're going to start seeing 5-year minimum investments, and then it's now going to become a marketing game to prove to investors that they can actually get out at year 5, rather than being tied directly to the success of the project that they're in. So I think this is really going to change it. As we move forward, you're going to start seeing more fund models. You're going to start seeing more models that Behring employs to provide a flexible exit strategy for investors, to provide liquidity, and provide maybe long-term equity positions at near market rates to make it an actual investment opportunity on top of the green card.
And that's like a huge part of kind of where we went when it was the traditional models. Like you had to have everything completely readied. You had to have everything completely prepared before you would gather all the money, you would start construction, you'd create jobs, and at the very end, everybody together at one time would all exit. And then, that in the earliest days, you remember the I-829 was kind of the governing item. Like when everybody was approved for 829s, they would release the partnership. And then all of a sudden you had a 10-year delay between China and somebody that's not retrogressed, any non-other retrogression country. And if you had a rule like that says you're not releasing the partnership or any of the funds until all 829s are processed, you were dragging everybody along for the ride of the Chinese retrogression. And that's when we went to models where you have the open-end funds, you have the living and breathing multi-asset fund that can enter and exit flexibly, because all of a sudden you were having to consider potentially hundreds of timelines dynamically. It wasn't just one I-526 filing with all the people in it, one 829 approval where everybody exits. You just couldn't do that anymore. So it really was a conflict in the way EB-5 was designed, where each individual investor gets their own petitions, but then the project and even the adjudications were looking at everything as a whole, and trying to get a large group of people to have to act in concert was always challenging. However, with the sustainment period only being based on investment, I do believe you're right. It's no longer looking at the immigration side of things and trying to say, hey, the immigration is really going to dictate your entire schedule. It's going to be the market for capital, and the market for capital to provide a safe channel for investment and job creation, and ultimately the investment immigration together. The market to do that will probably be in that 5-year range, which is why you see the bulk majority of market today is 5-year initial commitments. And then based on whenever the sustainment periods, the 89s or the exit, whatever that one was custom designed, it will take hold. So like, I agree with you on that one.
I think too, if you're USCIS and you are a government agency that is not well run and you have a problem with processing times, what would be the best way to stop the lawsuits and, get the foot off your neck from investors? Parole them in. So concurrent filing, issue EADs and advanced paroles, make the sustainment period only 2 years so they can get their money back. So then if you're an investor filing a lawsuit that says, why is it taking so long for you to approve my 829 or my 526? Well, the response in court would be, what do you care what the processing time is, right? You have an EAD and you have your money back. You don't have any injury, you don't have any damages.
Yeah.
It's a good
Is that
argument.
the next
It's a
world?
good argument.
But is that the next world of legislation where they're pushing for advanced parole across the board rather than just if you did concurrent filing while current?
Yeah, I mean, you've seen it in earlier versions of the bill. It's always been a non-starter for certain sides of Congress, right? Sometimes it's a non-starter for Democrats because Democrats want to see overall immigration reform, no advantages to a single EB category. Sometimes Republicans don't want to do it because they're hawks on China and they don't want to start paroling in hundreds of thousands of Chinese nationals. There's all sorts of reasons that it becomes political, but yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Why is parole only being provided to people that file in the US? Why is it not being granted at the consulate level? Why is it taking so long? So I think this is probably what the program should have always been, right? You have an EB-5 program and it should be rural, which is based in projects that benefit the United States, whether it be manufacturing or mining or infrastructure. And then you have urban development and you have a sustainment period that is shorter, maybe 2 years, maybe 2 years after your application has been pending 6 months, which is minimum USCIS processing time or the maximum USCIS processing time under the RIA, and we'll parole you in. So don't worry anymore about processing times. Don't worry about age outs. Don't worry about, suing us. I'm actually, I've been in this business 11 years now, so I've seen a lot. So it's pretty easy to become pessimistic, but I'm actually very positive about the future of EB-5. I think we are moving to, no, I mean, I think we're moving to a safer and a more transparent space. I think when you start seeing infrastructure projects launching that have, states, cities, municipalities as the borrowers, I think they are going to be less interested in USCIS nonsense. And I think this is going to give us some sort of route to stability for the investors as well. Because, yeah, of course, priority dates and visa backlogs are a real issue, but it's maybe an issue that you can suffer with if you've been paroled in and your children are never going to age out.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, there's probably a lot of comments on that too, Child Protection Act and aging out and the questions, but we're going to go through the chats here. We're going to roll hard and fast through a lot of these questions just because I do want to answer them. And I thank everybody for joining us today. But the one that has been asked 1,000 times, Nima, very quickly, let's just give like the 15-second answer to, can I file concurrently from a B1 or B2 visa?
Yeah, so I think, attorneys are going to tell you different things, and it's risk assessment, right? So what the State Department says, what USCIS says is if you enter the US in a non-immigrant visa, you are not available to file a change of status. So If you were trying to file from from a B to an H or something like that, it would require you to leave the United States and handle that process in the consulate. However, the regulations also say if 90 days have passed from your entry into the United States, that is a significant enough time period for you to have caused a change in your reason for entry. So I came in for a vacation. It turns out I love San Francisco. I want to start a life here. It's been 4 months. It's been 5 months. I want to file a change of status. That is allowable under the regulations. Where I think attorneys will differ is, well, if you enter the United States on a B1 and then you sign an investment contract with an EB-5 project after 2 weeks, is that invalidating your intent as non-immigrant when you entered? And I think different attorneys are going to give you different answers. I would say from my perspective, if you're looking at investment opportunities, that's what the B1 is for. If you're signing investment contracts, if you're making investments, that's what the B1 is for. But there's no requirement that you sign any documentation during those 90 days, right? If you have 6 months on your entry, you have time to come in, make a determination of what's right for you and your family. Maybe at the 95-day mark, 100-day mark, you do the concurrent filing from the B visa. This is also true for the F visa. This is true for the TN. This is true for the E2. This is true for all those visas, right? You really hear it most commonly said about the B visa, but it extends to any non-immigrant visa. So we feel comfortable doing it, but we're happy to have a conversation with it. We encourage you to speak to other immigration attorneys, and when you feel comfortable, that's when you pull the trigger.
Yeah. So it's all about being genuine in whatever you're displaying to the officers and whatever you're just displaying to immigration, and don't be caught being disingenuous with your intents. That is the advice. So the next one, talk about processing times, I-526, AP, et cetera, have been increasing. When will the backlog reduction cycle times and those goals come into effect? And we'll keep that one fast to the language in the RIA and go from there.
So, for the RIA, we should be seeing it, I think it's August, September, is when USCIS is due to release this study of how they're going to get to 6 months and less on the 526, 8 months and less on the 829. I think with respect to the 45, the EAD, the advanced parole, this is actually USCIS urgency. If you follow their news bulletins, they're doing everything they can to speed up processing times on EADs and APs, trying to get EADs back to 90 days or less, offering automatic renewals, offering advanced parole. Today, I think it was just announced that OPTs are going to get premium processing on their EADs. So these are stated agency goals of getting to 90 days or less. And I think we get there sooner or later. I think to see the benefit of 526 or 829 at 6 to 8 months or less, I think we still have a ways to go, maybe a year before we get there.
So like our official response out of Behring, which, not the immigration attorneys, but from what we read and what we see, and also because Greg Sheehan, our resident IPO officer, the way this is going to play out in a timeline is that the USCIS needs to conduct a fee study. They're going to determine what resources they need and how much they cost. They're going to raise our fees. They're going to then use those fees to hire the people they need in order to actually make those times take place. The process for hiring people, then training them, and everything else gets added on to that. So you finish the fee study in August. You spend 3 to 4 months on a hiring binge, bring all those people in, 6 to 9 months really to do a simple petition. And that's something like, travel petitions, certain H-1B petitions, things that are not complicated. As soon as you bring EB-5 into it, you have a whole host of considerations where you've got securities items, you've got economics, you've got immigration law, you have a lot of different things that go into EB-5. EB-5 is a long-winded training, rampage, trying to get an adjudicator that can go full cycle, start to finish, and approve a deal. It's going to take a while. So nobody should be expecting those initial processing times to come down really quickly, unless there's some sort of serious intervention from on high, whether it's from Congress or somebody else, to just start shoving petitions through the hopper. The reality is it takes a long time to onboard and then train and do what they intended to do out of the RIA. So the processing times are going to be elevated for a little bit, no matter what they say. However, the fact, and Nima, you can either agree or disagree, the fact that they put it in statute and they codified that these times are the targets and they're supposed to get hit, doesn't it give us ammunition in court when it comes to mandamus?
Yeah, I think, for the mandamus cases that we file now, because, the old regulations that were replaced by the RIA had targets for processing times. Many judges and courts have read those targets as, rather than hard deadlines, as guidelines that USCIS is not required to follow. I think what we believe in the industry is the language in the RIA is not a guideline. It's you need to get there. And that's evidenced by the fact that we're giving you this time, as you said, to do a fee study, to increase the fees. And that naturally goes with the idea of when are the increased fees going to go in. I know it was a lot of news and maybe there was a lot of emails that went out saying get in EB-5 before the filing fees double or triple. I think the answer is we don't know. When USCIS increases fees, they are required to show the math of how many hours it takes for an officer to complete a case. And based on those number of hours, this is what we need as a filing fee to be able to keep up with the new mandated, say 6-month processing time on the 526. The issue that we run into, and this was testimony from the USCIS director, is they're not tracking hours. They don't know exactly how many hours it takes to process a case. So when they published these new intended fees, they were guessing. And in this industry filled with lawyers, when you guess, you will be sued. So I think it's to be continued on when the fees are going to go up. I think we need an actual answer out of USCIS of what analysis they did to get there, what was the fee study, publish that fee study, and then we can move in that direction. So I wouldn't expect anything to happen over the course of the next few months, but it wouldn't surprise me if USCIS put something out, if only they were on this webinar and they want to prove me wrong.
Yeah, an open engagement would be, a gift, if that was to say the least. So another question, kind of going down the list here, looking at how can you confirm that a project is completely safe from the immigration aspect? So, how do you choose wisely from immigration perspective?
So this is a great question, and anyone that's spoken to me as an investor knows. The first thing I always say is you have two risks. You have investment risk and you have immigration risk. Investment risk is present in every project. We spent quite a bit of time talking about that today. And that's an analysis that as an investor, you need to make on your own with the help of a financial advisor, friends, whoever. From an immigration perspective, what we need to prove is that you invested, you fully invested, you remain invested, your money was earned lawfully, and the projects create jobs. So if we take the project that Behring has as 1900 Broadway as an example, you're looking at a fully financed under construction project with a completion guarantee. The economic model, the way jobs are created, are based on hard and soft construction costs. So every day as that project has workers building, spending money, and going vertical, jobs under the EB-5 regulations are considered permanently created. So even in the event that the final project is not financially successful, and this is true of all projects that rely on hard construction for job creation, your jobs are going to be created. You're going to get your green card. You're going to get your 829. And so what we really try to look at is a few different things. Is the project approvable under its 956F, which is the new exemplar application for project approval filed with USCIS? If this project was in the market prior to the new regulations being released, was it approved under the old regulations? Would it be approvable under the new regulations? Is the project financed? Does it have the money it needs in its capital stack to move forward with construction? Is there a completion guarantee? So we know that it's actually going to be finished. And who is that completion guarantee to? Is that completion guarantee to, for example, a JP Morgan or another entity that can enforce it? Or is it to EB-5 investors that may have no opportunity to enforce and make sure construction moves forward? So really what we want to do is we want to confirm that this project will move forward and create jobs. It does that within the EB-5 regulations.
Yeah, understood. Quick question that was asked on the project side, just talking about if your I-526 is denied, what happens, and what happens to the funds that are invested with you? From just speaking from the Behring side, there's an I-526 approval or money back guarantee. What that means is that if your I-526 is denied for any reason, that besides abandonment, where if you just don't answer RFEs, if you disappear, if you just don't respond to it, we can't help you with that. But if it's denied for any reason relating to the project or any sort of deficiency in the service that we gave you, you get 100% of your fees back and you get your capital back. And it comes, depending on the project, it comes from various different sources, if not from Behring itself. But the I-526 is guaranteed. That sounds great and it's good, but the reason that we're so easily able to do it is that we've never had a denial. So with 100% approval history, and really all the credit goes to really good documents, coming from guys like Nima and KLD, our securities attorneys at LexQity, people that have been in this for a decade, but also really simple projects. Build the building, you've created the jobs. Build the building, you get the green card. There's really not a lot of magic to the projects that we do. And that's why EB-5 was attractive to us to want to start it, because our core business fit naturally into the needs of the EB-5 program. So as soon as you start shoehorning EB-5 to become something that it really wasn't, like you had major issues where people tried to take traditional businesses that sound like they hire a ton of people. They would raise $1 billion off of a call center. They would raise a ton of money off of senior living because they think there's a ton of assistants and people that are working at these facilities. And they would raise money estimating how many jobs they're going to create on direct hiring because it sounds like a lot of people. And then they would go take this money and spend it on something else, whether it was buying real estate or buying asset, buying something else. Those projects got in trouble every time. But if you're doing something simple and straightforward like construction with completion guarantees, with fixed budgets, with really big institutions that have their claws sank into it, making sure that it does what it's supposed to do, you've got pretty good predictability. You can go down the rabbit hole pretty deeply, though. You can find out that there's assets out there that are extraordinarily difficult to build. Things that are out in the middle of the ocean, things that are on water, things that are unpredictable from a geotechnical perspective, things that you can't really predict exactly how it's supposed to play out. But if you've got 3-story woody walk-up style garden apartments, there's 1,000 contractors on the planet that can build those. Those are really predictable. Also, the materials are readily available. It doesn't have to be custom manufactured in a factory in Germany and shipped here, and there's not a lot of logistics in it. So keeping things simple in markets that are highly tangible, have deep buyer pools and a lot of attention, you can really mitigate a whole bunch of risk. So that's just why we like residential apartments in major metro areas like the San Francisco Bay Area or Silicon Valley. So with that, moving on to the other question from Snobnell. So the talking about this 2-year sustainment period, Nima, what does that do to job creation when you've got RIMS 2 and these other guys that really like that magical number of 2 years? What if the project had started construction and somebody hops into it while it's going and their 2 years doesn't quite overlap?
Yeah, so I think, this is another really technical and fact specific, right? If you're working with a project that, for example, is bridge financed, meaning that they have all the capital they need and they're using the EB-5 money to retire some of the financing, the investor, no matter when they get in, would be attributed with the jobs and would receive approval, even if the sustainment period comes after the project is complete. So I want to give a simple answer. I like to think that one of the things I'm good at is taking a complicated question and giving a simple answer, but you asked a very complicated fact-specific question. So I think we just kind of have to look at it. Okay. I think if your sustainment period is 2 years, I think a project that is looking at EB-5 to fill a hole in the capital stack, maybe equity, and they need X amount of equity to be able to get a senior lender to come on board, I think that's difficult because if you have investors that are looking somewhere between year 2 and year 5 to exit, and the project doesn't even get financing until year 3, then you're probably looking at an 8-year investment, and an investor is going to be upset, that they could have got their money back in year 2. So I think these things are, again, very, very fact specific, but I think that's, again, when you look at projects that are fully financed, they are taking out bridge. That bridge is not subordinate to 6 levels of money that is ahead of them and has no chance of being exited. I think these are the things that are going to become far more clear to investors as the rules change.
Yeah, and it actually brings up a really good point that probably will be discussed in the future quite a bit, especially as all this stuff comes to light and the sustainment periods really get vetted out, and there's like a strict definition that, hey, it's 2 years. The first thing that you would need to be worried about is like, what does the project ordinarily require? So no immigration, no EB-5, no USCIS, no pressure from capital markets to say, hey, perform in 2 years because that's all I owe you. Um, if a sponsor is actually promising a schedule that's faster than the asset actually needs, the chance of being disappointed is probably really high. If you've got a 10 to 15 year build out of a 1,200 home, 1,300 home master plan community, and it normally takes 10, 12, 15 years to build, and you issued a 5-year loan, you have a problem. If the sustainment period is 2 years from USCIS, but you just embarked on a 4 to 5 year development schedule to build anything, because it's 2 years for construction, a year to start leasing up, and another year to stabilize and then refinance and exit, you knew that it was supposed to be a 4-year deal or a 5-year deal, even if you made them promise 2 years. So like we
Yeah.
got to have a reality check that even if somebody's promising X returns, X numbers, whatever it might be, there's going to be a reality and a normal schedule and logic that needs to play out. And, unfortunately, it goes back to the other question that we answered earlier. It's like, where is the fact checking? Where's the historical performance? Like where can I find out if what these people are telling me is actually true? And that's actually going to come from the platform and the people that you're dealing with, where they will be able to show you a clear and concise track record. And yes, the sponsor will be self-motivated to provide the best possible story in the best possible light, because they definitely want your business. But you can also triangulate by talking to other professionals, talk to people outside of them and in the industry. And sooner or later, you can be able to triangulate into what the reputation is and pick people from different sides of the business.
Yeah.
We've got immigration attorneys, there's economists, there's securities attorneys, there are other brokers, there are other organizations, whether it's the IIUSA, even the Google searches. Like people want to know about Behring, and not only do you have us really accessible, really easily online, but also through 20 different attorneys that we've worked with. But we also have a long history of publicly fighting for investors in court against USCIS and winning. And like, you can't really view that and be a joke of a firm at the same time. Whereas there's a couple other groups out there that keep trying to sweep things under the carpet, where they're just repeatedly falling on their face. But again, like Nima said, you can't tell people how to run their business. It is what it is.
Yeah, and one thing in defense of regional centers, there's a lot of exceptional regional centers in the space that bring forward excellent projects. I think Colin would say nice things about many of his competitors. But I think one of the things that investors need to understand is EB-5 is not bank money. If you make a deal with a bank and they execute a loan agreement, they're prepared to give you money tomorrow. EB-5 takes a long time to raise. So if you are a developer, or if you are a regional center that's trying to bring forward a project, you have to be able to beat the rate that the bank is willing to give money, and you probably need to beat it pretty significantly. So, a lot of these investors walk away from this idea that regional centers don't pay anything. The projects take too long to finish, takes too long to get my money back. But I think, again, some of this has to be in an education of the realities of the market, the realities of development in the US. If you want to bring institutional grade projects to the market, you need to be able to beat money from the bank or money on the street. So that's often going to be under 5%, which means by the time you cover all your costs, there's not much left over for investors. So investors want more money. They want incredible job buffers. So how do you get a job buffer? When your construction timeline under the USCIS regulations is over 2 years, that significantly increases the job creation numbers, which significantly increases your buffer. So the things that investors are looking for in terms of safety and protection in their investment also require longer investment periods with shorter returns. So these are the things to think about, because investors are always saying regional centers are taking advantage of us. And that's not to say that that hasn't happened, but for the most part, it's not true. The regional centers are just playing within the parameters of what is marketable to investors and works under the regulations.
Yep. So
I got plenty of more long answers in me.
You're doing great. Whew. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, but I mean, these are actually really good questions. So like we didn't have the largest group. It's not like there's 300 people here, but the questions are strong. So I'll take this one just asking about denial for source of funds. So in the event of an investor being denied on a source of funds, this is there's two pieces to this. Yes, we do allow a refund on all the administrative fees and a denial. However, at the Behring companies, the Behring Regional Center, we do supervise what attorney you're using. And in the event that you're trying to bring in an attorney that's never done EB-5, you're bringing in an outside group that we've never worked with that has just no verifiable history to them whatsoever, we are going to have a third-party attorney look over that filing and go through that source of funds package and make sure that they've actually done a good job presenting your case to USCIS, because this is not, it's not an online form fill. Like the I-526 package can be 1,000 pages, and then it needs a table of contents. It needs a cover letter. The only reason I know all this is because I've looked at all of NEMA's filings and the way that they do it. But there's a clean presentation format that USCIS wants to see. And that's why we have guys like Greg Sheehan, former IPO officer. They tell us exactly what works and what doesn't. So long story short, and an answer shorter than what NEMA would have given, we review what you're about to send to USCIS. And if there's a problem, we don't let you file. And we've weeded out investors where we really would have enjoyed taking the capital, investing it, and creating jobs with it, but they just weren't going to get approved. And we had to say, we're sorry, we can't do this. We've got a 100% approval track record. We're going to protect it. We're not going to let you move forward. And you're going to be really upset with us when this thing is denied, and you're going to be disappointed waiting potentially a year or 2 years and then getting denied. We might as well just tell you now that it's not going to work. So by, a mix of, just oversight, having good attorneys do good work, and really vetting the investors beforehand, you're just not going to run into long-term denials that way. It's not unpredictable. Actually, that's probably the biggest thing. NEMA, take us through that. Like, how predictable is it to know whether an investor will be approved or not?
I think historically published approval rates were always high 80s, low 90s. Any denial rate we always attribute to bad attorney work, either on the project side or on the source of fund side. I think, what we're doing it's not that difficult, right? But if anyone has experience with US immigration, they know that adjudicative trends are not published. Adjudicative trends are just issued through RFE or notice of intent to denial. And then all of a sudden you have a change of stance, a change of policy that later becomes law through something like the RIA, right? We always say the RIA is new rules. It's not really new rules. It just takes everything USCIS has been doing for the last few years and codifies it. So there's plenty of great attorneys, but if they're not working in the space, if they're not seeing RFEs, they may get it wrong with your application. And the number one example I see for denied source of funds was when an investor used an attorney that didn't know EB-5. The investor owns a company, and they made the investment in the project through their business account rather than their personal account. USCIS makes a distinction between distributed And non-distributed income held in a business account, it's automatic denial. So these subtle things, but there's so many good attorneys in the space. If you don't like me, I'm happy to give you names of the other good attorneys. And many of us have training directly from Fragaman, so we know exactly what USCIS officers want to see, how to put the packages together. And I think Greg would tell you, who's not on this call, I think you have to remember when you submit an application for any visa type to USCIS, you have an actual human being that's sitting there to approve your application. And if they're presented with something neat and tidy in a table of contents and tells a story of your life and how you made money, that application is going to get treated better than a pile of documents.
Yep. Okay. Going into, a quick question for Nima then. This is one that came, from up above. What is the exemplar approval and what does it mean to the investors?
Sure. So previously that was called the Form 924. Now under the RIA, it's called the 956F. The exemplar is when a project moves forward, submits their project for approval for USCIS. What approval means is that there will no longer be any questions on the project. So the idea of the offering documents are compliant, the economic model is verified, the business plan meets what's called the matter of host standard, and all the other things in terms of construction timeline and permits and licenses, all of that has been reviewed and approved by USCIS. So if you file in an approved application, USCIS is not doing an evaluation on the project. They are only looking at your individual source of funds. And this logically should mean that your case receives faster processing time. We see now USCIS has moved to this idea that an investor no longer needs to submit project documents with their application if the project is already filed for approval. So a more streamlined process, but it gives you the safety and security of knowing you will not receive a denial for project-related reasons, for reasons that are out of your control. I would say in general, if you're working with an experienced regional center, an experienced EB-5 developer, an experienced EB-5 attorney, they should know 99% if your application is going to be approved before they submit it. And that should be true of the 526, the 485, and the 829. When I see a source of funds package, I will be able to tell you, yes, it's all going to be approved. You don't have to have any anxiety over approval. We only need to manage your expectations on processing times. And again, the other important thing to note is, I'm just going to keep going. Don't worry, guys. I'm here all night. USCIS is not Domino's. There is no pizza tracker that tells you it's in the oven, it's out for delivery. Your application is filed, it sits on a shelf. And it sits on a shelf until an officer is ready to pick it up. So that when we talk about these 18-month processing times, it's radio silence during those 18 months. I don't have an update for you. No attorney has an update for you. The project doesn't have an update for you. And I think that timeline of having pending applications, that's when the anxiety starts kicking in. So we can manage the anxiety by letting you know it's going to be approved. Then we can just worry about how long will it take to be approved.
Yep. I'm going to go back and answer one of these economic questions. So, one of the questions about market, how does a current situation such as a recession impact economic modeling? This is actually kind of a two-part question that, it can either, as far as the job creation, it can either cut it short and you can lose jobs, or in some cases, it will actually add more jobs. I'll explain why for both, but in the first example, in a recession, especially for something like RIMS 2, which is probably the predominant model that you see for most EB-5 projects, the indirect job creation, it wants to count two different things. There's expenditures, where that's spending on construction, purchase of furniture, fixtures, and equipment, spending on architects, engineers, any sort of consultants. That all translates into job creation. Then there's revenue, and there's generating business activity that will then calculate into economic impact in the community generating more taxes, which then gets spent further. And there's this ripple effect that's generated from revenues, from earning money, because it gets respent into that direct economy. So whether you're earning money or spending money, it goes into the model. In a recession, the revenue side will go down. You will earn less money. You will push back less money into the economy. However, in a lot of our projects, whether it's a multifamily rental, residential apartments, and all the mixed use stuff, student housing, whatever it is, the piece of jobs that comes from revenue is at the very end of the project. And the way that the business plans works, USCIS only wants us to put in 30 months of activity. When that leasing and the revenue part is actually at the very tail end of that 30 months that USCIS wants to see, it calculates as a very, very small proportion. So what that means is if only 10% of your jobs come from revenue, then 90% comes from the expenditures that are spent up front. Construction, architecture, engineering, management, the expenditure items in an economic recession, things are going wrong. There are supply chain disruptions. There are delays. All of that stuff typically ends up being increases in construction costs, increases in spend. If that's the case, the 90% bucket of job creation that you have just got bigger. It's not great for your investment because all of a sudden project costs accelerated, project costs expanded, the project's more expensive, you have a higher bar to return your capital. But in an economic recession, it actually means you're likely to create more jobs, and your green card technically probably has an even better chance of creating more than enough jobs, because that's the way that the job model will react to adverse environments in construction. It's not, like I said, immigration and investment typically run on two different paths, but specifically to that question, what does the recession or an adverse environment do to the jobs? It's probably actually going to increase the number of jobs that you make in the construction realm. Operating wise, maybe not. Direct jobs, you have a problem.
Another good reason to look at projects that are fully financed, have completion guarantees, have their Gantt or GMAX contracts that already has their construction costs locked in. So then any fluctuations in the cost of timber or other raw materials wouldn't necessarily impact the project. Certainly could impact the contractor. But these are the things that you also need to look to, especially when it's a long development timeline for the project.
Yep. Yeah. So, yeah. And again, like there's unfortunately the worst answer and the most probable answer you can give to a lot of EB-5 and investment is it depends. And like nobody wants to hear that, but it's just kind of a reality for it. So as far as those elements, is there any questions that we missed or anything that people are dying to hear about, other things that didn't make it on here? I think we got the vast majority of things that were posted. So, we're on here for 90 minutes. I apologize if I ruined your evening and ruined your week starting on a Monday, but, we definitely can help. Yeah, as far as NCE and JCE company names, for anybody that really wants to know, you are able to see any of the documents, whether it's the business plan, the private placement memorandums, all that kind of stuff. But this might be where the question comes from. It's in the data rooms. So when we give you access to the investor portal, that's not just the shiny PowerPoints with the pretty pictures and things like that. This is the full offering documents. Typically, it's after we've verified that you have intent to truly do due diligence, to move forward, to want to review the actual offering, private placement memorandums, limited partnership agreements, the really heavy black and white documents. That's where you're going to see all of the entity names, the exact people behind them, all of like the really serious legal and compliance items, which would be an NCE, JCE, that kind of thing. It's going to be in the investor portal. It's not just the presentations that are sent on the initial reviews. So if you guys want to just send me quick emails, I'll give you direct links to where those are, and I'd be happy to do that. So if you're really interested in the NCE and JCE names, they're in every document on the offering portal. Any other questions? Otherwise, we'll turn everybody free and not keep them captive. Okay, so Oh, wow. Nima, you are being called out. What is your
What's going
perspective?
on?
What is your perspective on different EB-5 investment options with
What's
1900
going
prop?
on with the with the questions that have all the long answers? I'm gonna give you a short answer. So I think 1900 Broadway is a little bit unique that it is offering multi classes of investments with multi returns and blended return rates. We help structure this with Colin and his team, so it's approvable. The project has been approved. We get investor approvals on a near weekly basis. I think this is an answer for it's a financial question, right? So it's an answer for you and your accountant, your financial analyst staff. It's risk tolerance, right? There's a debt class which has a lower return, but it means you get paid back sooner than the other investors that are willing to sit in common equity and receive the returns that come with higher risk. I think the reason that you don't see multiple classes in EB-5, so it sticks out in 1900 Broadway, is most EB-5 is sitting as subordinate debt. The developer doesn't want it to come in as equity because equity is typically more expensive, and EB-5 is a cheaper form of capital. That doesn't mean that those projects are good or bad. They could be great projects depending on its own financials, but it's a little bit unique here to 1900 Broadway. It would be a little bit unique to a fund model that a regional center has to offer these different investment classes. So it's a question of your risk tolerance as an investor. It is not in a question. It's not a question of approvability of the EB-5. That's squared away and secured.
Yeah. Question that came out of this, Nima, thank you for giving the good explanations between the options. They are all different risk and return, totally customized for what you're looking for. It's really supposed to be a suitability item, not really which one is better, because everybody's different. Not everybody can afford to have really, really low cost debt as their investment when they're borrowing money to pay for it. So, we had to create other options in 2019, 2020 when backlogs look like they could be as long as 10 years. So that really changes the perspective and why we built these things. But I'm seeing a question, discussing, signature bank. And was there more to that question as far as why it was asked, or is there something you specifically want to know? I'm trying to follow what that question is about signature. Maybe I missed it. Not sure, but I think Barani, if you're out there, that's from you. Okay. Oh, yes. So escrow. So talking about escrow, there is a lot to say about it. We use escrow typically when projects are not under construction and when the escrow actually serves a functional purpose. After the RIA, when our projects were like full blown under construction, we didn't actually move into a new escrow. Also, Granite escrow, which we had used for 8 or 9 years, they had left the industry of EB-5. So escrow we'll use for projects that are not under construction, where you don't have a straight path to finishing and completing the asset and being on time. When projects are already running and you're replacing bank money, we simply hold the funds and nothing moves until the I-526 is approved and the 797 notice of action comes back, showing that you've officially subscribed to the partnership and that the money can actually be sent out. Signature Bank does do escrow for EB-5 and they offer it. But if you look at the escrow agreement and what the escrow is actually protecting you from, typically with a lot of groups, they try to use it as if it's some sort of massive protection and things like that. But if you look at the project versus the risk that it's trying to shield you from, it's actually kind of a pass-through document and there's nothing stopping it besides filing an I-526 and getting a receipt. And ultimately, it costs you $300 or $500 an investor and a whole lot of wasted time and effort to do it. So escrows mean different things to different projects, and it is absolutely the most useful when you have a project that's not under construction and there's lots of milestones, like you need to secure a lender, you need to secure permits, you need to secure really important stuff. But if the project is already under construction with completion guarantees and all the escrow items already satisfied, the things that you would have had in escrow before, then it's kind of just a sham document. And just because the EB-5 market is used to it, they expect to see it. But depending on the deal, it really doesn't do anything. Signature Bank for us is more important because it was an actual bank and it was actual accounts, and they did custodial agreements and they worked as a lender for a lot of different things. That is the reason that you would be upset about seeing something happen to Signature Bank. As an escrow, lots of companies can do escrow. There's nothing really special there.
I don't know if I would be too worried about it. I think, Signature, so JTC Americas is probably the largest fund administrator in the EB-5 space. I think their number one banking relationship is Signature. But JTC, from what I understood today, is 20 banks that they can use for fund administration. So I think their intention is to move those accounts from Signature so investors' money is safe. But Signature has been a helpful bank in the EB-5 space because they understand the EB-5 program. They're able to open bank accounts for non-U.S. nationals, which is not easy. That helps facilitate wire transfers from countries that have currency restrictions: India, Vietnam, Bangladesh. So they've been a key player. Certainly, the news is unfortunate and it's scary, but we here are not trying to prey on your fears and cause a bank run at Signature. I think JTC America or Signature that is FTI insured, the funds are going to be saved, and they'll either begin operations again or there will be a new home for your money.
Yep. As far as data and things about Oakland and everything else, there's a ton of documents and data and market reports. And, if anything is out of date, just shoot us an email of what document you're looking at. And we just either, we need to go on the portal and swap out for the newer version or find out where it is. Maybe it's some link somewhere that we don't know about that needs to be taken down. If anything seems out of date, just let us know. We'll get you the latest, and there's plenty of content that's available. So we'll get you what you need. Any other questions? Anything? I'm proud of everybody. Like just about, we had 18 people at the highest point. 16 are still here, and this is a rampage of an hour and 40 minutes. So, thank everybody.
Well,
appreciate it.
I know, hotel room in New York, and I think it's raining quite hard outside. So absent my girlfriend giving me more death eyes, I think I got a few more minutes to answer questions.
We'll let you go, man. Everybody else, if there's anything else, thank you for joining us. We got through a lot of content, and if there's any questions, you can feel free to reach out to Nima or myself directly.
New York, Barani.
Yep. And Barana, Nima is in New York, but he will be in Vietnam. Are you going to Vietnam?
I was in Vietnam last week. I'll be in Vietnam at the end of the month.
Oh, bless your heart. Okay. Yeah. And the Behring team will be in Vietnam as well. I personally won't be, but Peter and Aaron will be. So anybody that happens to be there at that time, please do stop by, be friendly, say hello. So thanks everyone. Appreciate it. And until the next time, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to rant.
Talk to you soon, guys. Thank you very much.
Bye.